that, I'd like to introduce Grace Viana. So Grace Viana is the Deputy Executive Director of the National Science and Technology Council of the Office of Science and Technology at a policy at the White House. And so over to you, Grace.
Hey everyone, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Okay, great, awesome. So Jara, thanks so much for the quick introduction. As Jara mentioned, I'm the Deputy Executive Director of the National Science and Technology Council and lead for open innovation at OSTP. Really excited to connect with this group today. I know it's been a while since I've connected with some of you. This is something that we are very excited to get started on, just so that you can get to know your team, as Jara mentioned. She is with GSA, many of you know her. She is an incredible resource and has been an incredible just part of this team, really helping us spearhead this incredible project along with Stippy, who you will hear from in just a little bit. So I wanted to just give a quick introduction and table set before we get started into the nitty-gritty of the actual reporting. So as we all know, prizes and challenges help the nation innovate, and federal agencies and folks like yourselves have demonstrated leadership all across the board in running successful prizes and challenges to spur private sector engagement, advance scientific research and discovery, and also perhaps during this time most critically, inspiring the next generation of makers and innovators. So prizes represent a powerful mechanism, we all know that, to engage our best and brightest in solving some of the most challenging issues today as we look towards the future. So in response to that and just kind of wanting to elevate a little bit more in kind of the era of COVID, Director Drogemeyer, who's the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy here at the White House, has really understood the importance of prize competition, specifically during this time, and also the use of crowdsourcing and citizen science, and recognizes the great work that has been done, so much so that he released a memo to agency heads last week, or week before last actually, with the sole purpose to both update agencies on some of the exciting innovations that are coming out as a result of COVID-related work, and then also elevating just the use of prizes and challenges to also double down on efforts that may have already been, may be existing, or just encourage the use of prizes and challenges during COVID-19. This memo, like I mentioned, was sent around to agency leads, and we plan to send it around to the community later this week for everyone to just take a look at. So now kind of jumping into why we're hosting this webinar, why we do this in general. So if you're looking at the slide deck, moving right along to slide 2, why we do this is because it's the law. So Section 24 of the Stephen Wilder Technology Innovation Act, 1980, stipulates a biennial report on the activities carried out during the preceding 2 fiscal years under the authority granted by the American Competes Reauthorization Act. So OSTP is required to submit this report to the Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation, and to the Senate of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology of the House of Representatives. And so we would like to just, again, elevate this, make sure that everyone is really kind of understanding this new process. Obviously, we want to highlight the amazing work that has been done, as well as share valuable lessons with the greater community of practice. And so this effort will make all the work more accessible and distilled. And so to go into a little bit more details on that, I'm going to turn it over to GIF and the Stippy team to cover the next couple of slides on what needs to be reported, what's new this time, and just general things to remember and best practices. So GIF, turn it over to you.
Thank you, Grace, for that great introduction, and also just like being able to convey the excitement that the White House has over being able to capture all of the great work that folks within the prize competitions and challenges community are engaged in. So my name is Gifford Wong. I'm part of the Stippy team here that is facilitating this report. But as you might imagine, it's not a job that I'm doing alone. And in fact, I want to turn it over just quickly to Shirley, and then Tom, and then Tom will be walking us through the bulk of this webinar. So thanks again for that introduction, and Shirley, maybe introduce yourself.
Hi, everyone. This is Shirley Hahn. Like Jeff, I am with the Science and Technology Policy Institute. This is actually the third prizes report and now crowdsourcing and citizen science report that I will have worked on, and I'm very happy to be interacting with the community again. Thank you.
And I guess that leaves me. My name is Tom Olszewski. I am colleagues with Gifford and Shirley at the Science and Technology Policy Institute. And this is the part of the webinar where we're going to sort of go over what you can expect this time around. Just for a little background, for those of you who may not be familiar with the Science and Technology Policy Institute, we are a federally funded R&D center, an FFRDC. We were set up by Congress primarily to provide analytical and sometimes a little bit of operational support, originally for OSTP, but for any federal agency. So although we work very closely with the federal government, we ourselves are not of the federal government, which gives us a little bit of flexibility in terms of the kinds of support that we can provide. And in this case, we're helping OSTP collect the information for the next biannual report on prizes and competitions. So I'm going to start off with what needs to be reported. Well, any prize or competition or challenge that was carried out with the authorization of the America Competes Act must be reported. I'm going to take this opportunity to add that the Competes Act has some very specific language about what needs to be reported, and that is reflected in some of the questions that we will, in the survey where we'll gather the information. And the little secret about this is that sometimes those terms are not necessarily completely clear. We're aware of this, but we've tried to clarify everything that we can. We have our hands tied a little bit and we're a little constrained because Competes Act stipulates certain specific things. Prize competitions and challenges that were not carried out underneath the Competes Act, but use other authorities, and there are numerous other authorities that permit these. Some of them are agency specific. If it's not under Competes, technically it doesn't need to be reported, but we highly encourage you. OSTP and GSA definitely would like to get as full of a cross-section of prizes, competitions, and challenges run across the federal government as possible. As was noted in the previous slide, this is also your chance to highlight all the stuff that you do. This is a great way to get these activities some public notice and to get them in front of policymakers. So the other sort of qualification here is prizes and competitions, only prizes and competitions that were overseen and run by your agency should be included. There are lots of these activities that are supported by federal funds through, for example, grant mechanisms. But if your agency didn't actually run it, if they just provided funding to an external principal investigator or other grantee, the funding to do this, and they designed and ran it, then please do not submit those. We have to, it's not our choice, we have to remove those from inclusion. If you have any question about whether something should be included, please feel free to reach out to us. And although I've said it before, and Grace has mentioned this, I think it bears repeating that what you submit will become part of the public record, and it will be included in a report to Congress. So, you know, it's worth considering exactly how the light that you want your activity to be presented in. final thing on this slide, and you'll notice it's in ginormous bold font, all submissions will be due on the 20th November of this year. And by submissions, those are the submissions that should be cleared through your agency leadership process. So essentially that's the drop dead date to get us final approved information about your activities. For those of you who have gone through this process before, you'll note that this date is actually quite a bit later than in previous years. And that's because in previous years, the submission date was pretty close to, well, it was typically in early October, which is pretty close to the transition between fiscal years. And this caused two complications, both for those who were submitting responses, but also for us when we were trying to compile everything. If you put something too close to the fiscal year, first of all, agencies have other priorities, and this oftentimes gets put off a little bit in terms of submitting prizes and competitions. The other thing is that a lot of the information that we'll be looking for depends on a final tally of expenditures for a given fiscal year. And if we found that if we put it too early, agencies simply didn't have that information at hand yet and would oftentimes be sending it to us much later. So if they're going to do that, why not just make it a little bit more convenient and straightforward for everybody and choose a later date? The later date, however, means that we are hoping that we will get everything in as close to a final form as possible with as few revisions as possible. In any case, our intention with changing this was to make the deadline easier for everybody to manage. All right, so for those of you who have been through this process before, we've gone online. So in previous years, the way that this information was gathered is that we contacted every point of contact for every prize competition and asked them to fill in either a Microsoft Word document or a PDF document. And then we took all of that information and compiled it into the report. We have spent actually many hours and many months, in fact, working with Jarrett and Grace to, one, streamline the process in terms of the questions and the content that we're asking for, and to take the entire process online so that you will be able to enter this through just a conventional web browser. So this is how it's going to work. Every point of contact for every prize and competition that we are currently aware of will receive an individualized web link that's specifically tied to a given prize or competition activity. The points of contact who receive these individualized links will be able to share them, but that link is only good for that specific prize or competition. If at any time, so first of all, if you're the point of contact for a prize competition and you have not received a link by early next week, please contact us at prizes@ida.org, ida.org, as soon as possible. Let us know what might be missing or wrong, and we will get it straightened out as quickly as possible. In fact, I'm going to put a plug in. If you have a problem at any time entering data in this process, simply send us an email at prizes@ida.org. We will be happy to do whatever we can to resolve any issues, get things straightened out, and we will for sure respond within 24 hours during the normal business week. So even if we can't solve your problem, we'll at least acknowledge that you, that you reached out to us. Okay, so that's the stuff that is kind of just sort of set up the big differences between this year's process and previous year's process. In a few minutes, I'd like to switch over from some slides here to the actual web interface. So I'll be able to show you exactly what you should be prepared to see when you start entering data. Before I do that, I want to bring a couple of sort of general principles and general kinds of handful of things that we think that will be helpful for you to know before we jump in. So first of all, we will make a PDF of every question in the survey available to you so that you can preview what is going to be asked and you can gather the required information. Typically, that kind of the information that's gathered, there's questions about budgets, there's questions about partners and their contributions. And oftentimes in going through the process, you may not have that information at hand. The PDF will give you a preview of what you will find most useful to prepare for. There's also a number of questions that are long form text, several hundred words describing various aspects of the prizes and competitions. And the PDF will give you a chance to prepare those answers beforehand. We definitely, as is typical for these kinds of web surveys, encourage you to prepare those texts beforehand and then just cut and paste them into the online survey rather than trying to compose them on the fly. All right, so there'll be a PDF available. The next thing is, when you use the individualized link to enter the data for your particular prize or prize competition or challenge, you can use that exact same link to return to the survey at any time. In other words, you don't need to fill out the survey in one single sitting. You can enter the information that you have if for whatever reason you have to break off or you discover that you don't have information for a question that's being asked. You can simply stop, the information will be saved, and you can return to the survey using exactly the same link. Okay, at the end of the survey, the third thing to know is that the final thing that you will do is submit the survey. There is no special extra step within the survey to acknowledge clearance. In a sense, the minute that you submit the final document, we are assuming that you've gotten appropriate leadership clearance from your agency. Once you hit that submit button, you will not be able to go back and revise or edit answers. You'll have to reach out to us and we will be able to set you back up. But basically, there's no inherent way to incorporate that, like some sort of formal clearance. What you will be able to do, however, is to download all of your answers into a PDF document format that you will be able to separately circulate to whoever you need to get approval. So basically, once you've completed this, create that PDF, get your clearance. Once you've got all your approvals, return to the survey and hit submit, and that should be pretty much everything you need to know for the process. Two more things about the survey. Because we're online now, we can take advantage of what is called display or skip logic. Essentially, what this does is in previous hard copy surveys, oftentimes people would be filling them out and reach a question that to them, for their project, didn't make a whole lot of sense. But it was appropriate for other kinds of prizes and challenges that others were dealing with. And it just kind of makes things a little messy and sometimes causes a little bit of confusion. The advantage of using an online survey, or one of the advantages, is that depending on how you answer an earlier question, you can avoid even seeing unrelated or relevant questions subsequently. And that's what this skip or display logic is. And the reason I bring this up is that you may see, if you have more than one project, or if you have a colleague who's entering information for a different project, you may see slightly different versions of the survey because it's adapting to the way that you answered questions. So just be aware that it's not standard for everybody. You will have a little bit of control on how you answer things about what further you'll see further along. And lastly, if you look at the slide, at the bottom, there's an image of what one of these pages will look like. There are the logos for GSA and OSTP. And at the top here, where the red arrow is, there is a progress bar. So as you progress through the survey, that will show you how much further you have to go. It's always nice to see where you actually stand and how much more you have to slog through. Okay, at this point, I'm going to switch from slides to my web browser, but that's what I wanted to cover for the basic ground rules about what to expect. As I make that switch, this is probably a good opportunity also to ask if there are any questions at this point. If you just put those in the chat room, GIF should be able to log on and pose them for us.
Yeah, Tom, there are no questions yet, but thanks so much for the PowerPoint presentation so far.
Okay, awesome. So I will take the lack of questions either as stunned silence or the exceptional clarity of our slides and discourse at this point. Okay, so I should have set this up to the previous page. So,
hey, Tom, while you're saying there have been
go ahead,
two questions. Oh, sorry. Two questions did come in.
Okay.
Concerning, do we plan to open the data? And like the previous report, we plan to make available the data in the same way that we did with the previous report. And then another question came in discussing the potential challenges that will be launched prior to the end of the fiscal year. How can we get a survey URL issued? That's a great question, and that's something that that email address that Tom had underscored in the presentation. Feel free to email us that, and we can develop the rather generate the URL and send it off to the appropriate either POC or agency lead. I know some leads have requested that they receive the URLs for all of the various activities out there. So, so for folks that are planning to launch something at the end of the fiscal year, we can definitely address that. We could just send you a URL with just notifying us by email. All right, and Tom, that looks like that's it. Why don't you take it away?
Okay, awesome. So what you should be seeing on your screen at this point, hold a second. Sorry, I lost the screen there for a second, and I need to figure out how to get it back. Oh, I know how I need to do this. Here we go. Okay, so you should be seeing a web page right now. At the top of the web page are the logos for GSA and OSTP. This is the front page for the online survey, and this is what you should see when you hit your individualized link. Things that I like to point out, most of this is kind of boilerplate, introductory material. The one thing that you should definitely look out, the first thing you should look for on this page is this line at the top. This survey is associated with, in this case, the olive oil cold press challenge. That is not a real federal prize competition or challenge. It's a little dummy just to go through this presentation. You should see the name of your particular prize competition or challenge that's tied to the individualized link. If it's incorrect, if it's not the right prize or challenge, or the name is wrong, please contact us as soon as possible and we will get that straightened out. Okay, so in addition to kind of the boilerplate about competes and what is required for submission, there's a couple of basic definitions for terms that in the past we've found that various leads have questions about exactly what we mean by participant or full-time equivalent. If you need to refer back to those, this is where they are. At the bottom of each of these pages, you'll see a button that says next page. And when you hit that button, you go to the next page. And this is the first page that actually collects information. At the top of almost every one of the web pages in the survey, you will see the name for your prize competition or challenge. So you should always be certain that you're working with the right thing, but each page or most pages will have exactly that information. Okay, this is a good page to start on, not because I need to go through every one of these questions, but because they actually present all the primary ways that there are ways to enter information. So at the very start, so we already know what the title is. The first question here is whether you have a web link for your event. The next question here is a text box that asks for a summary of exactly what your event was about. And then there are a bunch of multiple choice and radio button questions about the status of your, in this case, the olive oil cold press challenge in FY19 and FY20. And then we have agency identification and entry, and then at the end, the name and contact information for the primary point of contact or the lead for the activity. Okay, so none of that should be too mysterious, but it does display the three primary ways that you'll be able to enter information. So I'm going to do this question here, status FY20. Here you have, these are actually multiple choice. These are check boxes. Whenever you see the check boxes, you can have multiple answers. So it is possible for an activity to have been launched in FY 2020, be ongoing, and then completed. I suppose ongoing is kind of exclusive, but it could be launched and completed. You can choose any of these. In this case, for my example, it was launched in FY19 and it was completed in FY20. The radio buttons are a little bit different. So the next question down is the authority that was used to run the challenge. I chose here that this is actually a competes authority prize competition. However, I could always choose another authority, in which case I would have to enter it here, or you may not know. But you can only choose one of these options. Okay, I don't think that's too strange for plenty of other kinds of web interactive surveys and information. One of the other ways that you can enter information is with these pull down lists. So for example, right now, I have this olive oil cold press challenge is sponsored by the Department of Commerce. When you hit this pull down list, you should be able to find whatever department or non-departmental agency category that is appropriate for your particular activity. Depending on how you answer your agency, the next level down will only have administrative units, offices, or other administrative components relevant to that agency. So this list, the Bureau of Economic Analysis, the Bureau of Industry and Security, is only relevant to the Department of Commerce. So if I choose National Institutes of Standards and Technology, that's within the Department of Commerce. If I go back up here and I choose the Department of Energy, you'll notice that I get a totally different list of offices. So I'm just going to arbitrarily choose energy programs. If your department or agency doesn't have any subsequent lists, that lower part will be empty and you can enter any further information on the next question down. The point is that you don't have to scroll through every last office in the federal federal government, by going through this hierarchy, we should be able to identify the correct office that's supporting the project without having to enter them all in sort of idiosyncratically. Lastly, there are questions that ask you to simply type in an answer. So for example, this is a window that's asking for somebody's first name. For those of you who have seen The Godfather, Santino Corleone is Don Corleone's son, hence the olive oil cold press challenge. Windows like that simply take one line of text. There are other text boxes, for example, the summary box here, that take much more extensive bodies of text. So this is just some dummy text I entered. So typically all of these text boxes give an approximate word count. Just so you know, what's actually counted is the number of characters. So there's a conversion between words and characters. The reason that we've asked for words is, at least in our experience, people have a better idea of how to generate, say, 100 or 200 or 300 words than the equivalent number of characters. In any case, as you enter stuff in these text boxes, if you have not filled them all the way up, it will give you the remaining number of characters. Okay, so for each page, you'll see one or more questions as you go through the survey. When you're done, you hit next page. In this case, I am going to deliberately mess something up. I'm going to leave this required text box empty. If you have incorrectly, and by incorrectly what I mean is if you have left a question unanswered, or if you have entered something that's in the wrong format and you try to continue to the next page, it will take you to that question and ask you to fill it in. So the problematic question will have this red message telling you what the problem is, and it'll be highlighted in blue. So this question is required. To proceed to the next page, I have to fill it with some text. Not necessarily the total 300 words, but something has to be registered, and only then can I proceed to the next step in the survey. Okay. So next question is whether the olive oil cold press challenge has multiple phases. And I'm going to use this question as an opportunity to demonstrate what I brought up before as display or skip logic. You may have a challenge that this question doesn't even make sense. What do you mean phases? There are some challenges out there, however, that, for example, start with a proposal or a pitch, and then those that are accepted in that first step sort of develop prototype designs. And then in a third step, the designs that are approved by an evaluation panel are asked to actually produce them. So there are 3 phases. There are different numbers of participants. There are different prize levels for each of these phases. If you don't have one, then you don't need to answer that. But I'd like to show you what happens if you say yes. So yes. Next page, it'll ask you, how many phases? In this case, I'm only going to have 2 phases. If I answer that and I go to the next page, it will ask you which phases are actually relevant to this report's fiscal years, FY19 and FY20. I've chosen both phases to be relevant in the reporting period. And then I'm asked to enter some information. So when were submissions for each phase opened, when were they closed, and what was the number of submissions? Now, at this point, I'm only answering questions about 2 phases. Let me show you a couple things here. First of all, I can always return to pages that I've previously successfully filled in. So by hitting previous page, I can go back and I can see phase 1 and phase 2 were checked. If I go back again, let me change the number of phases and show you how the subsequent questions respond to that change. So let me say I'm going from 2 phases to 4 phases. So I go to the next page, and now this page asks me not just about phase 1 and phase 2, but phase 1 through phase 4. Let's say that all of these are relevant to the reporting year. When I go to the next page, I have to answer questions for each of those phases. Okay, so this is an example of how your answers in earlier questions influence the questions that you'll see subsequently. And again, to repeat, the idea is to try to avoid presenting you with questions that aren't relevant to your particular prize or competition. Okay, so I mean, I don't think that's too unintuitive, but I have to go back here. The reason I have to do this is because I filled out the entire survey so I can skip through it very quickly without having to bore you with literally generating an answer for every question. But I only have 2 phases, and if I left those open, then I wouldn't be able to continue further. Okay, so I think it's pretty. What's that?
Tom, this is, sorry to jump in. Some questions came in to the chat box. I know that our next branch is to sort of just point out the next sort of like big skip logic section. So maybe I'll answer those questions as you kind of move forward a little bit to that.
That's perfect. That's exactly what I have on my notes here. I'm going to skip ahead to the next thing I want to show you in the survey. And while I'm doing that, Gif, why don't you handle those questions?
Yeah, great. So some questions that came in include one, just confirming that the PDFs can be generated before the submit button is pressed, and that is absolutely the case. What Tom was discussing, and we may even get to see it because we're in it live, there's an opportunity for you to generate a full PDF of all your responses, and then that's what you print out as a PDF and to then share with your leadership for clearance. And then once you get sign off, you can hit the submit button and you're good as gold. Another sort of confirmation style question came from someone who I believe is more of a sort of coordinator. And so just wanted to ensure or confirm that as long as they contact us, rather than have us send the individual URLs to the POCs, we'll send all of those URLs to the coordinator or agency manager or however you're called or titled rather in your agency. And the answer is yes, right? You indicate to us that you'd rather receive those URLs instead of the POCs, and that works out fine. Again, it's a lot easier when you have a single individual filling in the responses, as you're probably seeing from Tom's demonstration, because it helps keep the data more clean. A question about project POC contact information, how it will be used and shared. That is just for coordinating on the report. Elements that are made public are only those that should be made public. And again, we'll follow the guidelines that were used in the previous report. And then finally, there was a question concerning, once an individual submits the survey, Tom had indicated that, we're considering that then ready to then be incorporated into the larger report. So the question was, do we expect the coordinators to resolve any edits or changes outside of Qualtrics, or can they see sort of like the constant updates that their agency POCs are doing kind of like in an analog way, or because there is no way to do this analog before. So basically, the expectation is the coordinators are probably part of that agency clearance process. And so that coordinator can either edit the PDF that is shared with them by the POC, or they can be filling out the survey themselves, right? Because they received the individual URL, or because a lot of you are technically savvy, you probably can see this coming, right? If a POC says, hey, I have filled everything out, And rather than print out the PDF, they can then say, you now can have access to the URL and you are driving the survey, that the coordinators can then go in and do the editing as they please, right? So basically there are a couple of ways to do it. We encourage one person to be ultimately responsible, but because you don't have two people driving a car. But I guess to change my metaphor, it's kind of like a relay race, and one person can certainly pass the baton, or the URL in this case, and have that be edited in that regard. And again, if there are additional questions, we're going to have some Q&A time at the end, and that prizes@ada.org is up 24/7. So we're always ready to receive questions that way. Tom, sorry to take up so much time. Back to you, and I'll continue to monitor the chat box for questions.
Thanks, Gif. No, that was great. And actually, it's kind of a couple of those preempt some of the stuff that I'll show you in just a second. All right, so I've skipped through quite a bit of the survey. It asks about partners, budgets, FTEs, the kind of fundamental information accounting for, how these various activities are run. But more or less, all of those questions have the same kinds of text or radio button or multiple choice or pull down menus that I showed you in those that first page or two. And there are a couple places where there's a similar kind of branching logic. For example, if you have more than one partner, or if you have no partners. If you have no partners, you won't be asked questions about your partners. If you have multiple partners, you'll be asked questions about each one of them, for example. So you'll notice at the top, my survey completion bar is getting close to 100%. The following question, the one that's on the screen now, is one that was added at the request of agencies about the kind of support that they provide or is available from agencies for various offices and leads and organizers of these events. When you see this question, this is a flag. You're getting pretty close to the end. So let me show you what happens next. This is also a new question. As Grace mentioned, OSTP is very cognizant of the current pandemic circumstances that we're all working under. And they are interested if there are any prizes, competitions, or challenges that respond to, in this case, a national health crisis or emergency. So we have a handful of questions that actually ask about this. The olive oil cold press challenge, of course, responds to a national health crisis because of the cholesterol issue. So I answered yes. As a result of that, was it implemented in response to this national health crisis? I answered yes. And now I have a text box that gives me the ability to describe exactly how, why, the timing. And this is a, if your prize or competition does not touch on this issue, you won't see this question. You won't be expected to answer this. This is part of that survey logic. But I wanted to flag it because of, well, the current social circumstances that we're under. So if your prize or competition is relevant, please be prepared to provide some information about it. All right, so finally, close to the end, we are almost there. You'll see this. This is the end of the survey. By clicking the next page button, you will have the opportunity to review your responses and print or save and export a PDF of your responses for any approval process you may need to execute at your agency prior to final submission to STIPI. So this is pretty much it. When you see this, there are no more questions for you to answer. When you hit the next page, what you see here as I scroll through the window is the answer to every question that on every page that I have responded. For example, I answered there were 2 phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Here were my responses for the starting point, the closing point, and the number of submissions for those 2 phases. For every question that was relevant to your prize or competition, the answer is provided here as you submitted it. Notice there's a button at the very top of the page that says download PDF. If you hit this, all of the information that you see on this web page will be downloaded as a PDF that you can then share separately, independently of a browser or that particular individualized link. I'm going to go to the very bottom of this page. Okay. At the very bottom of this page is exactly the same verbiage that you saw on the previous page, that this is the end of the survey. So you'll notice that there's two buttons here. I can go back to the previous page, as with all other pages in the survey. And I've got a final button here that says submit. There is no next page. If I hit submit, all of these answers will be sent to Stippy. They will be uploaded to us, and you will not be able, once you hit that button, to change them without contacting us. So until I hit that button, all of this can be revised. Don't hit submit until everybody that needs to give approval has given their okay. And I'm not going to hit it now, because if we have questions where I need to jump around through this and revise things on the fly, I'd like to keep that leeway. But basically, this is it. Once you hit submit, you are done providing us with information. Next time we come around to you, we will have prepared the full report, and we will be looking for agency clearance. But I expect that will take some time. More or less, that's everything that we wanted to show you with regard to this new survey and the new way that we're collecting information on prizes and competitions. Before I finish off, I'm going to put in a final plug. If you at any point have any questions or have hit a roadblock or just need to be certain that what you're doing is what's expected and what we're looking for, please feel free to write us an email at prizes@ida.org. And that's pretty much it. Hopefully this is going to be easy peasy, and we would love to take questions at this point.
Hey, Tom, thanks so much. There's a couple of questions that came in while you were talking, and I bet you there will be a bunch more. Thankfully, Alex and Gabby with GSA is helping me track some of them, but the ones that I captured while you were talking, just again to confirm, coordinators, this is a question, and I'm going to try and answer it in a way that hopefully addresses a couple of different ways to view this, right? Like Tom had spoke about the URL. The URL are individual to the activity, right? So if you did something, in this case with the olive oil, you get a URL for this activity. We really encourage one person sort of being in control of entering information into the survey. Mostly because we are unsure what happens if there are two people on the survey, and as we are all aware, sometimes something that you can see in Chrome, you can't see in Firefox, you can't see on Safari or Explorer. So it's why we just highly encourage folks to try and answer it with one person. So the question of you should be very careful about how the URLs are shared or used. Absolutely be careful, right? You don't want to overshare and then have 3, 4, or 5 people trying to fill out the survey, especially if they try to fill out the survey at the same time. A question about whether a coordinator can directly edit the survey responses. The answer would be yes. But again, you want to make sure that if you're editing, that you're actually the one or the only one in the document basically at the same time. So in a way, this isn't a shared document in that multiple folks can be on it. We can maybe all petition Qualtrics, but that's sort of how that works out. Another question that came over is whether or not there would be a way to see any changes or updates made to the survey responses over time. I think within the at the either POC or agency coordinator level, again, if the POC has like a first draft and then part of the leadership clearance, it goes up the chain and comes back with edits, that POC is responsible for ensuring those edits are incorporated before hitting submit, right? And that this page actually that Tom is parked on right now, which is a great page to be parked on, this addresses a concern that someone had raised about having an extra step. This is the extra step, right? You have the opportunity to download the PDF, to then share it with your leadership, and then go back previous pages, as Tom demonstrated, so that you can incorporate some of those edits that have been suggested. There isn't a way in that Qualtrics doesn't have like a Microsoft Word track changes per se, but again, you could track those changes or iterations by comparing the PDFs that are produced when you download the PDF. And we have faith that the agencies will adhere to whatever process they are most comfortable with.
So Gif, I just downloaded a PDF, and we didn't rehearse this, so we'll see if it works. Let me see if I can open it up in a browser window, and people will be able to see exactly what, at least this case for Olive Oil Cold Press Challenge, what it would look like. So this is, it's not an elegant document, but it is functional. This is what you would be able to generate to distribute to anybody that needs to edit, comment, or clear the document.
That is great. And in that time, a couple more questions came through. Thank you again, community members, for sticking with us and asking such really good and relevant questions. One question that came through was whether or not we will be sending URLs to the POCs that we currently have. So to answer that, unless the agency coordinator has asked to receive those URLs rather than the POC, we are only able to send URLs to POCs that we are aware of. And that's actually a great plug for the community to, talk to your, I guess, virtual neighbors, talk to your colleagues and friends in the community. And if they are indeed running a project, an activity under the Competes Act, but have not heard from us, have not received a URL, just let them know about our relatively easy email, prizes@ada.org, so that we can actually issue one, right? We can only issue URLs to activities that we're aware of. And for the text boxes that are incomplete in the PDF, those may appear incomplete in the PDF, but in the survey itself, there are questions that are required. As Tom had mentioned, the legislation requires many of these questions, and then some of these questions are optional. We recommend answering them because the communities themselves have sort of asked that these additional questions be put to the community members running projects, prize competitions and challenges, so that they can ask some interesting questions about how effective, say, those are. So these are great questions. I have a couple more coming in. There's one that I have to read, so apologize. How do the stages question account for programs in stages 1 of 4, with the remaining 3 coming in the next future years? Is there a way to recognize there is NA versus 0 submissions because stage 2 or 3 hasn't happened yet? That is a great question about the stages, and I think
let me flip to that pages, and we can return and see what happens. But while I'm going back, why don't you take another question? We'll circle back around to this one.
Okay. Yeah. Basically, we're definitely concerned with like this question seems to ask, like, if you're in phase 1, but you know you have 4 phases, how can you mention that or comment on that? And I think for this survey and how it's constructed, you would just indicate that you are in phase 1. I guess, Tom, you're going back, so this is good.
Yes, so I'm gonna go back to, we have how many phases? And let's say that we have, so previous page, whether I have multiple phases or not. Yes, I do. Let's say that I have 4 phases. Next page. Which phases did the Cold Press Challenge go through in FY19 and FY20? So let's say that phase 1 ended before FY19. We don't need to account for it. 2 and 3 are either occurred or ongoing, but phase 4 won't even start until after FY20 is over. That's what this question addresses. And then I only have to answer information about those phases that were relevant to the reporting period. So in terms of the survey, we now know how many phases total there were and which ones are relevant to the reporting period. So that it's possible, that gives the submission the opportunity to sort of provide the full arc of the activity, if it's a multi-year activity, while only having to deal with those answers that are relevant for this particular report. So you can't answer the number of participants for a phase that hasn't started yet, obviously. And for those phases that have taken place before, especially if it was a competes activity and the activity was reported before, we should already have that information from the previous iteration of the report. So I hope that addresses the question. That's how I understood the question, but I'm sure the questioner will let us know if that actually provides the answer or if I missed the target.
Yeah, that's great. There are a couple more questions actually, and Shirley might be better positioned to answer them. So Shirley, if you want to get on the questions that we were sort of discussing.
Yes, thanks, Gif. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself there. So there were a few questions. First, for those that did not use the authority for competes for the prize competitions, are you still sending the URL links at the same time as those projects that did use the authority? Yes, we are trying to send all of the URL links out at the same time. This is for everybody will receive a link if they responded to the Survey Gizmo survey that we sent out previously to gather the POC information and the titles and so forth. If you have not completed that particular survey, then we ask you at this time to please contact us at prizes@ida.org and let us know the titles of the projects that you would like to report so that we can generate those links. But we are trying to provide those links all at the same time, but we understand that this might be a rolling basis as individuals decide voluntary for reporting which ones they would like to report. For another question, in previous reports, did we remove the projects that agencies only provided funding grants but did not directly involve in leading it? Or is this a new approach for this upcoming report? So that is the approach that we have been taking on all previous reports, so this is not new. If you read the congressional language, this is where it limits us in deciding which ones are included in the report. And because the report has gotten so large in scope, we are only including those that the federal agencies are actually leading. So this means that things like where the federal agency would provide a funding grant to an extramural individual or organization or something like that, but does not actually control or is super involved in the rollout of the prize competition, those would not be included in the report.
Thanks, Shirley. Wow. Again, really appreciate all the questions coming in. I feel like I'm a dispatcher or something like that, just like answering the call lines. So one question that was posed, or maybe a clarification, I realize now that maybe not everyone on the line has the opportunity to download a PDF, maybe because of agency firewalls or whatever, and we're all so aware of how, like, you know, different agencies have access to some of the different online tools. So if you happen to be an office that cannot download a PDF, you know, from a third-party site, again, I'll go back to, it's almost like a radio call line. Go back to prizes@ida.org, let us know, and we can try and give you a Word version of that. But that is only if, you know, you're unable to download that directly. Obviously, the direct download would be the most efficient. Some additional questions that came through. There was a question about when would we like to know the challenges that we need to send links out for. I would say as soon as possible. For some that have already had contact information put onto challenge.gov, we actually reached out to those folks with a sort of pre-survey survey to kind of confirm that the POC we're contacting is a federal employee, or if we needed to, and if they knew who the agency lead was. So basically, to the question of like, when do we want to know? Like, we want to know now. If it takes some time, like the end of the week is great. But in reality, you have until November 20th. It's just that if you give it to us, or if we generate that link November 19th, then there's only a day to create the input. So the sooner the better for that one. And I do feel guilty for kind of hogging answering all of these questions. Another question.
Gift, please continue. Thank you.
Another question, and for for this question, or for the person who asked this question, you may want to reach out to us if I'm not hitting this right, but I'll try it again. It says it pertains to the text box incompletion that showed up in the downloaded PDF within the context of review and clearance. I suspect that, you know, maybe the reviewer will wonder, why is this text box empty? And so as a filler outer, whether you're the POC or you're the agency coordinator still, you know, going up the chain for clearance, you can indicate to them that this text box is empty because it was not, it's not a required response. And so it's an optional response and you opted to not answer it. But again, if that's not quite hitting what it is that you're asking, perhaps we can talk offline via prizes@ida.org. Other questions include if we can provide agency contacts POCs that we currently have to eliminate submissions before agency review approvals. So this question, and I apologize, I'm not sure if I could find who asked that. It's the same person who asked about the text box incompletions. Maybe we can talk offline. I'm not sure what this question is asking. But broadly speaking, especially for the agency leads and coordinators, like we indicated before, if you wanted to reach out to us because you wanted to receive all the URLs, we certainly have the capability to let agency coordinators or leads know who the POCs are that are associated with those activities, at least as long as we have those recorded. A couple more questions that have come in include, if a prize competition did not have a prize purse in terms of money, is there an option to provide other types of non-monetary prizes? I believe that we have an opportunity to, you would think I would know this survey backwards and forwards with all of the questions, but there should be an opportunity for other.
Yes, there is, for non-monetary prizes.
There you go. All right. Well, I appreciate Shirley for jumping in.
I'm trying to scroll to that page, but please continue with the next question. When we get there, I'll flag it.
Awesome. Yeah, and so maybe related, it looks like there's a question that says, oh, so there's an option to provide non-monetary prizes, but should the prize purse be zero if there is no monetary prizes? And then fill out question 38.
So yes, if there is no actual prize purse in terms of monetary amounts given out, then the prize purse should be zero. But then please indicate the other non-monetary prizes. We understand that the prize competitions come in all shapes and forms, and sometimes there is no monetary prize involved, and it's in other things like subscriptions or a trip to somewhere to meet so-and-so or things like that. So yes.
So the shared screen should be at that point where there's questions about the prize purse, total prize purse offered, total prize purse awarded in case they are not the same, and then a text box that allows description of any kind of other component of a prize, as Shirley mentioned, travel, if it's a student project, t-shirts and stickers, the opportunity to compete for a federal contract at a later stage or something like that. All of that can be entered pretty flexibly in the text box.
Great, thanks. There is 2 more questions that I can see so far. One regards financials, and the question is, what if the launch was in FY19, but the agency had actually obligated those funds in a prior fiscal year? So how we have answered, so there's the transition between FY18 and 19, and then of course the transition from like FY 2021. How we had answered FY 2021 is, if you had announced an activity during FY20, we would encourage you to then report it in this report, because it was made at least known to the community that this was occurring. With regards to financials that were launched in FY19, in spite of the funds being obligated in the prior fiscal year, the launch is what makes it public. And so if the launch occurred in FY19, then we would hope that you would report it out in this report, which covers FY19, FY20. So hopefully that addresses that question. These are some really good questions that actually get at specific questions in the survey. So kudos to folks who actually did the pre-reading. There's a question regarding partners, I believe. It is in regards to, I'll just read it. If a partner only supplied SMEs and judges, do you want us to put a monetary value on their time at question 43, or do you want us to record that they served as judges in question 45? That is a great question that I suspect will be different depending upon who was actually retained. I think it would be perhaps easier to respond in question 45, which is more of an open-ended response, to be able to say that that you had been able to procure SMEs or judges, unless, for example, you know that there are contractors that somehow has a certain rate, and then you could also indicate that specific detail in question 43. And then the last,
I believe the instructions also include distinguishing contractors and vendors from partners.
Sure.
So the partners are also bringing something of value with them, as opposed to the contractors or vendors who are paid to provide a service or something like that, but otherwise aren't necessarily bringing any uncompensated, directly uncompensated value. So it's just a squirrely little kind of distinction between the various types of organizations that agencies may be working with to make these events work.
Excellent. Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification, Tom. That's very helpful. And then here's a question that just for the community's awareness, we actually are trying to develop a frequently asked questions, and while we're maybe looking for a way to share that widely, our intention is at the very least to maybe email the FAQ out to the community, every 2 weeks or something, in case some of these questions pop up again, and you may not have time, say, to revisit the video that is being made of this webinar. That being said, there was a question about specifically question 32. Question 32 in the survey asks, please comment on future agency plans for prize competitions for the next 2 fiscal years, and then FY 21-22. If activities are not yet planned, please respond with an NA, and this is actually a response required. So the law asks for a sense for what are the future plans. As we've talked with the community just in developing the survey, we had some wonderful beta testers. They had indicated that it really depends. And certainly POCs may not have a sense for what the agency is intending to do. Agencies may not have leads, may not have awareness of what might be planned, and or it may be inappropriate to really get into the details of future plans. So basically for this, we're looking for general sort of prize competition plans if they are known and available and appropriate to share. But as we have indicated, because the response is required, it is also fair to just indicate with an NA. So hopefully that addresses the general gist of that question. And again, if there are specific questions that are out there, I encourage folks to reach out with prizes.ida.org. And again, if there are any other questions, that's actually the last one there is, so that's great. If there are any other questions, I apologize that we run over time. Oh no, we have what, 12 minutes left?
Yes, we're still good. So
yeah, we have left. So I encourage folks to bust out those typing fingers, type out some questions in the chat. And again, as you've heard, we have prizes@ida.org, a great way to reach out to the team. And Tom has promised a response, at least an acknowledgement of that receipt within 24 hours. We stand by that because we stand by Tom. So
with the caveat, business week. Just saying. Just saying.
That's fair. All right, another question.
We do just to make clear. We do have a team of people. In addition, we have a couple of other people who are working with us at Stippy. In addition to me, Shirley, and Gifford. So we should have enough people to at least, like I said, acknowledge that we received your question. We may not have an answer right away. We may not have a solution right away, but you should not feel abandoned or alone in this process if you are just stuck trying to complete the survey and provide the information that we're looking for.
Yeah, a great question came in sort of asking how are we defining completed? Is it the date of winner announcement, or are you deferring to the agencies to define and be consistent between reporting efforts, at least within the agencies? We understand that, again, this is a very diverse community. And so if there's something perhaps obvious like the date of a winner announcement and that's it, right? There's no after action report or whatever, then that could serve as the date by which you say this has been completed. But probably it's more important for these agencies to remain internally consistent, since all of those submissions will have to go through a similar clearance process. So we defer to the agencies, but something like the date of winner announcement could be a great way to, I guess, define it. So great question. Hopefully that is helpful.
Survey is set up so that the dates or the windows of time when major events, for example, award announcement, it's a pretty big deal for a prize competition. You should be able to indicate those, and so they will be captured, whether they are formally the final last item of activity within the agency. So whatever you need to communicate, I think we can accommodate, and we just want to make sure that we capture all the sort of important benchmarks for a particular event.
Great. A couple more questions came in, including one directly to me. So if you have not heard your question posed and it was sent to me directly, put it to everyone, and that way we can ensure that it's captured. But that one to me, I think was, sorry, now I lost it. When are submissions due? They are due November 20th. And remember that November 20th date, the expectation is that it's already gone through your internal agency review and clearance process. Some additional questions include, will we be using any of the Qualtrics analytic tools to do more complex analysis? And broadly speaking, the answer is yes, and yes, we will be using Qualtrics, but we'll actually be using other analysis tools so that we can perform more complex analyses. And hopefully some at least interesting visualizations. Because the report is paper, it may be hard to have interactive visualizations, but we can get into that maybe offline if you have some ideas. A question had come in regarding how might the public health, such as perhaps COVID-related projects, be highlighted or used in this report. And Grace had highlighted, I think, some of the memo and highlight data sheet that OSTP and Director Drogemeyer developed just a little while ago. And so I think some of the public health projects may be able to populate like a call-out box, just as in the past, right? We want to try and select project activities, prize competitions, or challenges that again really demonstrate how innovative the community has been for the reporting period. And so basically, or perhaps broadly speaking, they can be used to highlight how different agencies have come together to come up, say, with a suite of projects, if it was like a coordinated effort, or we might try and incorporate one or more as exemplars in a call-out box of something. Okay, some folks saying, great job, Tom. Okay, that's not a question, I just want to throw that out there. Great job, Tom. I think one more has come in, see if I can just read it. So this is in regards to question 33, financial categories. Where would you place the cost of an implementation vendor? The vendor is a contract expense that the vendor provided outreach, web support, etc. That is a great specific question.
I'm going forward through those in the partner section. So this is one of
Yeah.
the, you cannot go from one page to another as if it's a table of contents. You have to scroll through each page individually. And we should have a nice agency funds.
So question 33 on the PDF starts with, please indicate how agency funds are used in support of the activity, which is right
For
there.
each fiscal year. Okay, that's what's on the screen right now. So it's a multiple choice check boxes for those appropriate things. There's also a checkbox here for other, please specify. So you should, if you check this, you should be asked to provide information on what other or how that money was dispersed in terms of whether it was through a vendor or whether it was in-house.
Yeah, and again, realizing that we actually are kind of approaching now the 90-minute mark. Not only, well, so if there are questions that we didn't answer or didn't answer to your satisfaction, I encourage folks to reach out to prizes@ida.org, and oh, that's great. I think someone may have answered themselves. Put the vendor cost in there. That works as well, and then you can sort of specify that it was it was one vendor, but they provided this, that, and the other. That's good. And before I forget, I think folks can see in the chat box too, but we love getting feedback on all sorts of things, including a survey to sort of feedback on this webinar and some of the support that's out there. So I'll call attention to the hyperlink that is in the chat box for folks. If you're still on the line, maybe click on that and take a couple minutes to help fill that out, because it'll help inform and improve future webinars. I don't seem to see any additional questions. Again, this is not the last time you'll have the opportunity to talk to us. This is just really the first time in a long time that you've had the opportunity to talk to us. So again, feel free to reach out to prizes@ada.org. I want to take this time to certainly thank Gabby and Alex, who are with the GSA GGU team, for helping host this webinar. And thanks again to Jara with GSA, Grace with OSTP, and the folks at Stippy, obviously Tom, and also Shirley and Andrew who are on the line. Couldn't bring this together without a team, and that's what we're hoping for with this report from this community. We know that all of you are really passionate with the work that you're doing to help just innovate or and create, and so we're really looking forward to all of your responses. Yeah. So other than that, we'll stay on the line just to hang out. But, oh, sorry. One last question came in. Sorry, well, I'll read this out in case folks have called in. So as a longer follow-up for later, it would be helpful to know how Congress, the primary audience for this report, has responded to, leveraged, or what feedback you have received on it to inform future reports, especially how we might provide more effective responses to these constituents. That's a great call out, and probably it doesn't have to be how we end, but it's a good way to end, right, is to remind folks that our audience is Congress, right? This report will go to committees and obviously both the House and Senate side. And so it'd be great feedback to sort of see how those congressional committees and Congress as a whole responds to the report or uses the report. So we will definitely be part of the process to help inform that, and to the extent that we can, but obviously, because sometimes you just don't know what resources an office may use, like a personal office, right? But great. I think with that, I'll say thanks and goodbye from my end, and maybe turn it over to Gabby or Alex if you have a specific way you want to close this out.
Thanks, everyone. And make sure if you get a chance to fill out the survey that we put in the
in the chat, and have a good afternoon. And this event will be posted in a couple of days.